If you are a reading teacher or an ESL teacher working in an elementary school, chances are that you will be asked to supplement whatever reading program that school uses. It's important for you to understand what challenges and benefits each of these programs present for English learners and for native English speakers who are struggling to learn how to read. So this presentation is going to talk about how our beliefs about reading translated to reading programs. The first one we'll talk about is the top-down reading model. The man who is called the grandfather of whole language here in this country is Goodman. And Goodman believed that we do not read every word, that we use our background knowledge and natural language to guess at words, to make an educated guess at words that we do not know. The sentence up above, yesterday the boy, the ball, is an indication of a little boy who doesn't know what that word starting with M is. So here's what happens. He's going to come to that sentence, and Goodman says he's going to figure out what it is by looking at just a few graphic cues, like the beginning letter, and then searching his memory for syntactic, semantic, or graphophonic cues, especially syntactic. So he may read on and then go back and say, oh, yesterday the boy missed the ball. Now, that's his tentative guess at word identity. Since it's not correct, what his reading teacher or ESL teacher might say, does that word fit? That's a syntactic cue. It's a cue for him to activate his syntactic system and figure it out. So he tries again, and this time he says, yesterday the boy married the ball. Now this time his teacher would say to him, does that make sense? Hoping that that will cue his semantic meaning system. And finally, the little boy goes back and says, yesterday the boy, and he just stops. And it is only at that point that the teacher will ask him to use some graphophonic cues, like look at the first letter, look at the last letter, get your mouth ready. What do you think it might be? So again, he will guess at the word identity. And by the way, Goodman says that with the little readers, we make a tentative guess, first using syntax and semantics, and in the last resort, graphophonic cues. If our tentative guess is correct, they go on. Otherwise, Goodman says that students will go back and repeat the same text. Top-down models are very clear that reading is a predictive process, that it's based on the child's natural language. The reader samples print just enough to confirm her guess about what's coming. Prior knowledge strongly influences the early stages of processes. So those of you who are ESL teachers are probably already hearing some red flags for what may create a real bottleneck for English learners. Let's take a look at a top-down reading program, the kind of reading programs that are most prevalent at this time, guided reading programs. In guided reading, they start with very little books, levels A, B, C, etc. There's a close picture text match. So that's an advantage because the children can guess what the word is by looking at the picture. There's a natural language. This is not a Dick and Jane look spot, see spot, run. There's an emphasis on meaning-making strategies, not accuracy of word identification. There's little control of word difficulty, and new words may not be repeated for quite a long time from one level to another. So you can see for English learners and for children at risk of reading disabilities who are native speakers, there's some advantages in that it's natural language and that there's picture text matches, but there's also some very disadvantages in terms of how often words are repeated and the control of the word difficulty. Now, if we go on to Philip Gow proposed a bottom-up reading model, and he believed that reading begins when visual information hits the eye, and the eye forms an icon of that visual information. And then the scanner goes to work from the character register and decoder to figure out what that word is saying, what the letters are, and how it is pronounced. Once that occurs and the word is known, the word goes to primary memory, and the little reader goes back and follows the same process with the next word and the next word. And Gow says that when all of the words in a sentence are known, they go to what he calls the place where sentences go when they are understood. Gow calls that Merlin, the comprehension process of the brain. He does not pretend to be able to understand that process, but he feels that his reading model accounts very well for the process of word identification. One of the bottom-up reading programs that was popular quite a long time ago and is seeing a resurgence is Reading Mastery. In Reading Mastery, discrete skills are taught very systematically and sequentially. This program uses and teaches sounds, not the letter names. It is very, very highly scripted. It's teacher-proof. Builds one sound at a time. For a review of its effectiveness, you can go to the What Works Clearinghouse. David Rumelhart was a cognitive neuroscience who proposed an interactive reading model. He does not pretend to be a teacher, but he says that what happens is when the grapheme or the word hits the visual system, your brain, your pattern synthesizer, extracts features and sends it to the brain. And then within the brain, there are both lower level and higher level processes that operate synergistically in order to figure out what the word is. So there's orthographic knowledge of letter chunks, letter patterns. There's lexical knowledge of sight words. I would label that something different, which I'll show you in a minute. And then there's syntactical knowledge of how the word fits in the sentence and semantic knowledge. What Rumelhart says is that this is operating at the same time. I have adapted Rumelhart's interactive model to an interactive developmental reading model, in which I believe that fluent and accurate reading occurs, and as a result, comprehension and enjoyment occurs because of first activation of lower level processes where logographic is understanding words simply or recognizing words simply because they are recognized, or orthographic, which is reading words in chunks, including prefixes and suffixes and roots. And then also phonologic, understanding how to decode a word. When those are set in place so that a student has learned how to read, then the higher level operations of semantics and syntax are able to help the student read ever more complex words and text. It isn't as though the semantics and syntactic sense is not operant from the beginning, but it is essential that the lower level processes be in place if a child is going to be a good reader. And so here's an example of an interactive reading model. I know of none that have been developed as core programs or basal programs. All of them are missing some of the basic processing components, especially the phonological part. This one, by the way, is available free for download, although it takes quite a bit of time to put all the materials together. It's beginning reads. And some of the reasons that I think that this one is ideal as an interactive reading program is that first, there is a close text picture match. You can see from the pictures that there are realistic pictures from the very beginning that match with the words. Everyday words are introduced first, and there's a mix of sight and decodable words. There's frequent repetition of words. The one drawback as far as older English learners comes, or in fact older native speakers who are still struggling at the beginning of reading, is that the pictures feature young children. But you can see there's some advantages: the close text picture match, the everyday words, the frequent repetition of words, and the mix of sight and decodable words. Those will all support reading development for English learners and for native English speakers who are struggling to learn how to read. The series itself starts at the very beginning of first grade reading, and it will, by level 10, take a student to the last half of first grade, in which case usually they're ready to enter quite a few different reading programs. So what I'd like you to think about in reviewing these programs is to take a look at each of those programs and indicate which model it belongs to. Is it adequate according to what the National Reading Panel says are the 5 domains of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension? And what are the challenges and benefits, particularly for English learners?